Hello, hello. Welcome to the second of our online meetups. My name is Dee Collins. I'm the founder, editor and publisher of Focus Magazine, a lifestyle and business magazine for women. I'm also a life coach and work with women in business to align to their message, overcome limiting beliefs and live their best lives. Today I'm delighted to have Mary Parker on board. Mary is an intuitive and clarity life coach. One of the reasons I asked Mary to come on board today is that she is particularly strong in relationship coaching and also coaching people in times of stress. So of course, both of these factors are really popping up to the fore in these times. Now, Mary, I believe that this is not your first time in isolation, that you've actually chosen to do a 30-day non-talking isolation some years ago. Tell us about this.
I did. It was very interesting. And in fact, I also was not able to leave the place that I went to. It was a 30-day silent retreat. The very first thing, I hadn't even thought about it, but I just sat down and created a schedule because I realized I had 24 hours every day that I was going to have to fill. And if I didn't know what I was doing, it was going to be overwhelming. So I found it wonderful that I was able to think, okay, when I get up, this is what I'm doing, then this is what I plan to do. And there were quite a number of things, you know, there was going to be a time of meditation, obviously the time where I had my meals, and I put all of these things in, a time where I went for a walk, because there was a beautiful, I was doing this in Malta actually, so it was a beautiful walk that they had in this monastery where I was. And so I did exercise, and then I would come back and I'd do something very tangible. For me, it was writing and it was painting. So I really broke things down throughout the whole day. And by the end of it, I remember on the 29th day, the person who was directing me, because I was able to speak for half an hour during the day, said, look, you know, you don't need to do the 30 days. And I said, but I want to. This is beautiful.
So Mary, give us some advice about getting through the 30 days. Obviously, we can speak to each other. You've mentioned perhaps a schedule. Just if you could give us some tips and things.
Yes, yes. It is very important to take some time out. You know, if you are a couple or a couple with a family, discuss with each other when you would like some time out, whether that's just sitting in the garden on a nice day or having a little space inside or having a time of meditation. Whatever it is, that you respect each other's time out and you help the children to recognize this as well. Now, something that might help with the children is, and I've noticed this a lot when I'm coaching people, is you spend time with your children, but the children are used to that. And to actually say, look, Annie, I want to have some Annie time with you, to a child. And so you call it that. And it becomes a very special time for that child because now it's been labeled, now it's been named, now it's their time. It's something you would be doing anyway, but to give them that little bit more specialness about it, it's really beautiful. And so also that's sort of time out and time with your children. Now, another part of that is that there is going to be conflict at times. So a couple of areas that I think might be helpful. The first one is, if you haven't already done this or done it with your partner, talk about what is your overall intention for your relationship and create some sort of statement that really sums it up. That's an umbrella statement. It's not something that is for now, but for always. So, you know, it might be, you know, I want a relationship with you and I want to be able to live in it so that I value who you are, what you're doing and how you are just as you are now, and that we look towards each other for our support. Whatever it is, I mean, this is just an example, but whatever that intention is, when you create it, then part of when you're in those times where you're feeling frustrated, go back to that intention. It allows you just to take a step back. It's that whole thing around big picture and chunking down. So, you know, you're chunking down into the little things that are frazzling you, and you need to talk about them. And at the same time, it takes you up to the big picture help you to be slightly more objective about it, so that chunking down and big picture are parts of the same thing, but perhaps knowing that bigger intention will help you see the bigger picture and allow you to take a breath at least, in that moment, just to take a breath and breathe and think, this is what I want. This is what I want to work towards. This is what I'm in this relationship for, not all these other things. Yes, deal with the things, but this is what I want to create. Am I creating it by doing this? Am I enhancing or taking away from our partnership, our relationship?
Just going back to having space in that, obviously it's all important that the adults have space too, because it's going to be pretty hard living on top of each other and not seeing anybody else. So certainly have a room, if possible, that you can go into, close the door and have some space. Share that time with your partner. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. To know that that's the time you have. And I mean, obviously be flexible if something comes up. At the same time, attempt always to have that for at least one part of the day. It might only be 15 minutes. It's important to have it and know it's yours. Know it's your time, because you need to go to somewhere where you know no one will interrupt you. It's that feeling of, just that little bit of space that you can recollect yourself. You can come back to what you want to do next. Maybe even just spend time looking at what your schedule is, what you would like to contribute into it during the day. But it's important for both of you to have that time out. Because if you stay as much as you can the same, it's not as scary as, all of a sudden we're in this whole new place. So some of the language that might be helpful is to use words that are the same or that are not changing, so this is the same as we always do, or no, there's not very much change here, we're doing it at home rather than at grandma's, or so it becomes a place that's safer, because we don't know often how children are going to interpret what's happening. They won't necessarily understand it. There'll just be a feeling of insecurity. And one of the areas I've realized is most important for people is that feeling of security. Once you feel safe, you can step out and do many things. You can step into your, what I like to call the stretch zone. So you've got your comfort zone, you've got a stretch zone, and you've got a panic zone. In both the comfort and panic zone, you do nothing. Nothing happens, because in comfort, well, you're just too comfortable. In panic, you're paralyzed. So in that stretch zone, once you're in a place of safety, you can step into it a little more. And in this time, we can explore new ways of how we do things, which could really be exciting.
How do you suggest to motivate teenagers during this time?
Because it's difficult to know what exactly prompts them, it can be a really good idea to ask something as simple as an open question, a what question. And by that, I don't mean to look for information. So asking a what question that's future-based means you're asking for them to seek a solution. So if they're wandering around looking, forlorn or bored or frustrated, say, what would be something that would help? And they very likely will say, I don't know. That's the usual answer. It's easier just to not seek it, really, because often people don't want to get it wrong. So when we don't want to get something wrong, we say, I don't know. It's easier. And when they say, I don't know, you still continue with that. You go, okay, but what might be something that appeals to you? So now you've taken away the need to find an answer. I'm not saying this will always work with teenagers, but when you ask that, what could be something that would appeal? And I really want that we look at this together, because we're going to be in our bubble for the next 30 days. Now, we can look at our bubble as something really positive or really negative. It's much more helpful if we look at it as something really positive. It's something that's keeping us safe at the moment. It's something that can be utilised to strengthen bonds in a family. It can be many things. In fact, I loved what you said about, what do you love about this time? When you asked that question. And it's about shifting how we're looking at something. It's about shifting our perspective. So it's not all the doom and gloom. I'm not saying be Pollyanna. I'm saying be sensible and keep the balance. Another thing, so, although I've said it's really good to step back, get the big picture, at times there will be conflict in a relation. And that can be healthy, so long as it's used in a healthy way. And one of the ways that I really like, I came across this years ago, but I find it such a helpful little resource. And it's what I call agree, explain, instruct. And I use that because it's like AEI, helps you to remember, agree, explain, instruct. And so someone might say something quite negative to you, you don't know what you're doing these days. Well, you can imagine what that might create, a real flare up. What on earth do you think you're doing? You can't talk to me like that. Or instead of which you could do, you don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, but you agree with their right to say it. So you could turn it around and say, yeah, I understand how you might think that at this point, based on what's been happening. However, and then you go on to explain, I've realized I need some time out. I need to be able to take that time out in order to be able to give more input back into the family, and then instruct. Instruct's a hard word. It's more just to remember AEI. It's more about asking for that support. However, so I would love it if you could recognize that and help me to go forward with that. What's happened is when you've agreed with their state, with what, their right to say what they're saying, they stop arguing because they know they've been heard. So it can open up a new way of speaking instead of just yelling at each other, trying to hear, get it over the other. You turn it around and then you can have a conversation, and it can be a very good resource to interrupt that flow of conflict and turn it into a place that's more constructive, more informative, more of a learning time. It can be something as simple as, look, I'm feeling really conflicted at this point. I actually want that we can talk, and I'm just going to take a little time out just to breathe, and I want to speak to you with respect, not shout at you. So I'm just going to get back for the moment. And what you're doing is creating a type of boundary of how you want your conversations to go. And of course, if the other person doesn't have an audience, they won't continue either. And one of the things that I have noticed is really, really important is your tone, how I would speak to someone. So I can say, I want to step back from this just at the moment, or I can say, I want to step back from this at the moment. Now there's two very different tones going on there and two very different communications. One is neutral, so there's no agenda and no judgment. The other one is very judgmental, basically saying, I'm stepping back because you don't know what you're talking about. So it doesn't create very much help at all. So a big part with any of these things is notice, and it can be very hard when you're feeling upset. So it's about breathing, really we hear it all the time, but the reason we hear it all the time is it's so important to just take that breath, to allow the oxygen to come into your blood again, to de-stress slightly, and then, use that neutral tone. And I'm going to share a quote here which says, which I think is beautiful. Being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. From a man called David Oxford. And I don't think we realize the incredible power of listening. Most people think, and listening without an agenda, listening without having to say, oh, but I've got the solution for this. Listening without saying, oh, I can relate to that. Nothing that you truly listen without that agenda is huge. And it's a hard thing to do, and we can't do it all the time. But, the question was, how can you improve your relationship? To listen. And if the other person is not a particularly big conversationalist, talk about that. I'd like to hear more of what you're saying. And if, he says, oh, I don't, or she, I made an assumption that he or she says, I don't have a lot to talk about. Say, well, I'd love you to think about it because I'm really interested in your thoughts on this. Maybe give space. And help the other person recognize that they are loved, they are respected, they do have value, or whatever the other words that come to each person listening here today would mean for them when they're listening.
Mary, thank you very much for being on the program today. If any of you would like to reach out to Mary at this time, you can find all her contact details on her website. So that is thefasttrackcoach.co.nz. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Mary, and we'll see you all on Friday.
Thanks, Dee.
Bye.